All right, it looks like we're all back in place. So we will resume. It's 2:39. Attorney Jarris, if you want to go ahead. Ms. Pinch, did you finish reviewing all of the documents?
I did.
Okay, go ahead, Attorney Jarris.
And are you able to confirm that all of these documents are work product that Ms. Campbell provided to you and that you reviewed?
Yes.
All right. Please turn to page 265 and look through 267 a little more carefully.
Sure.
And with the exception of the handwriting on these pages, are they documents that Ms. Campbell provided to you for your review?
Yes.
And are pages, well, is page 265 a document that Ms. Campbell would have put together?
Yes.
And is page 266 something she would have filled in information on?
Yes.
Is it out a printout of something?
It is. It's a printout from e-reimbursement. The system.
Is page 267, putting aside the handwriting, is that a document Ms. Campbell would have prepared?
Yes.
Okay. So on page 265, is the handwriting yours?
Yes.
And is that your corrections to or feedback on Ms. Campbell's document that she prepared?
Yes.
Could you please walk us through the handwriting and explain what you were communicating?
Sure. So I guess from the top, the circled notation about please use the title on the program for both the title listed on the top of the page as well as the first paragraph that did not match the title on the program, and it needs to. Going back to the top then, where I've circled by funding source, I circled 136. Janae Orr, who's one of our accountants in the Department of Radiology, manages many of the 136 account balances, and her approval would have been needed to use this funding source, and there was no supporting documentation in the packet that approval had occurred. We already talked about the item in the first page. The second page, there was something wrong with the date. Without having the backup documents, it's hard for me to say what.
I'm sorry, you said the second page. Are you still?
Or sorry, second paragraph. I apologize. The on Wednesday, September 11th, 2018. I'm assuming I've circled that because that wasn't the date he presented. But I don't have the the back documentation, but that's likely what it was circled for. In registration fee, I crossed out a something redundant. In the airfare, the date was wrong. Dr. Black would not have departed in June and returned in September. In the lodging item, September 12th, again, was an inaccurate date because if you look at the top, the travel dates were actually through the 13th. And if I remember right on this one, Dr. Black stayed in the hotel through the 13th. The Hotel Vidara was not the name of the hotel. He was not there 3 days. And there was a statement that it was booked through, the hotel was booked through Fox World Travel, but there was no documentation to support that assertion. In the next section, there was where it says lunch provided. There was no documentation to support that lunch was provided. And so that documentation either needs to be provided or we need to pay for that meal through a per diem. In the taxi shuttle train section, I've circled one of the cab trips, the $26.71, because that amount included a tip that was over 20% of the fare. And while travelers can be as generous as they would like, we only reimburse 20%.
And then do you want us to go to the next page?
Sure.
And is page 266 part, would you have received that at the same time as page 265?
Yes.
Okay. And
So,
is the handwriting
yeah,
on this yours?
it is.
Could you explain what you're trying to convey with the handwriting?
Sure. This is just, I'm happy to walk through them. It's a reiteration of some of the errors I found in the narrative that were reflected as entries in the e-reimbursement system. So I know this is a little hard to read, but both kind of fuzzy and in tiny font, but circling some concerns about dates and number of days stayed. And then the 6/15/18 date, the not, having traveled from June to September, I circled one and then scratched it out because that wasn't the meal I meant to circle. So I wrote that one was okay. I circled again the $26.71 because of the tip, and then circled this $34.73 because of the no supporting documentation of the lunch meal.
And what did you do with these 2 pages after you marked them up?
These 2 pages would have been included with the rest of the supporting documentation she provided, and all of this would have been, well, once I kept a copy of these 2 front pages that you have here just for my own record so I could keep track of what I had corrected, I would have left it back on her chair or her desk for her reprocessing or re-editing.
And so page 267 looks similar to page 265, but has a different date at the top.
Yes.
It is and I think you said 267 is something Ms. Campbell would have provided you.
Correct.
Is it essentially an updated draft of the same thing?
It is.
And could you please explain is the handwriting on this document yours?
Yes.
And could you please explain what you were trying to communicate with your handwriting?
Additional corrections, either as a part of her editing that was an error, or items that remained incorrect that were previously identified as problems.
So were these types of errors typical for Ms. Campbell?
Yes.
And I think you said some of them were the same errors you had pointed out on a prior draft. Could you clarify that for us?
Sure. So, for example, the second paragraph that starts with "on Tuesday, September 1st, 2018, that date was still incorrect. It was not the date he presented.
How did you know that?
Because it would have been in some sort of correspondence, or more likely an agenda or itinerary for, like, as part of a conference brochure. It would have been printed material that would have come from the conference.
Well,
And how
isn't it, may I just state that September 1st is not part of the time he was gone? And is this on this particular date, this was part of something he was supposed to do at this event?
That's right. Yes.
So that would seem to be another reason I'm just noting.
Sure.
Correct? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
And how did you know the dates of the conference? And
Because they were we would either go to a website, and pull the conference information, or the financial specialist would, or it would be provided by the traveler. Many of our faculty who travel regularly, they all, bunches of them go to the same conferences. So, and this would have been the case for one of these.
are there any errors on the second draft that were also
Yes.
on the first draft?
Yes. Under the lodging section, the date of departure from the hotel was still incorrect, as well as on the taxi shuttle train section, the tip over 20% was not corrected.
Were these types of errors typical for Ms. Campbell?
Yes.
Were these types of errors typical for other individuals who held the position of financial specialist senior?
No. Certainly as people train, they do make some errors. This was a significant number of errors that didn't seem to improve even when answers were provided.
And who would provide those answers?
Both Marie Rutan and I.
And how do you know this wasn't a typical level amount of errors?
Because I'm looking at other people's documents, or I receive feedback from the approver, who is also my supervisor, Margaret Bierencut.
So Ms. Campbell's work product is not the only, Ms. Campbell's e-reimbursements are not the only person for whom you reviewed e-reimbursements. Let me strike that. Have you reviewed e-reimbursement packets from other financial specialists?
Over the years, yes. This isn't typically something that would fall under my role directly. So I was much more involved in her training than I would be in our staff here today. Because that would have been the job of someone in Marie Rutan's role. But yes, I have looked at packets before.
Okay. let's go to page R301. Or it's Bates number 301. And if you could look through page 307.
Yes.
And setting aside the handwriting, are these documents that Ms. Campbell would have submitted to you for review?
Yes.
And is page R301, aside from the handwriting, a document Ms. Campbell would have generated?
Yes.
And page 302, apart from the handwriting, is that a document that Ms. Campbell, does it reflect information Ms. Campbell would have entered into the e-reimbursement system?
Yes.
And does that go with page 301? Is page 302?
Yes.
Okay. And page 303, aside from the handwriting, is that information that Ms. Campbell would have entered into the e-reimbursement system?
Yes.
Does that also go with page 301?
Yes.
Is the handwriting on these 3 pages yours?
Yes.
Starting with page 301, could you please explain what you were trying to convey with your handwriting?
Sure. The only writing on these pages that isn't mine is on 302, the word breakfast written twice. That is not my handwriting.
Do you know whose handwriting it is?
Teresa's, Miss Campbell's.
Thank you. If you could walk us, starting with page 301, walk us through your handwritten comments, please.
Sure. So starting from the top, both the title here and then the title listed in the first paragraph does not match the title on the program. I have a question, it seems, about the total reimbursement based on the notes, I guess, in the second and third pages, so we'll get there. Miss Campbell spelled Dr. Garrett's name incorrectly. The circled item here, Society for Imaging Informatics in Medicine SIM Annual Conference, is a completely different conference name than the other 2 that were also incorrect. A couple paragraphs down further, John Garrett purchased in-flight Wi-Fi so he could remain productive. Wi-Fi, just to check work emails, is an exclusion if there's not an explicit business purpose, like I needed to attend a meeting or something more significant than just emails. This item here, the benefit to the university, needed to be a little more meaty to explain much better how this conference would benefit the university. It was a fairly generic explanation.
Ready for page 302?
Yes. So upon the department administrator's request, she preferred that whatever funding was used would be handwritten on this portion of the document, so that way she knew what the funding was that was entered, and so that information was missing. I circled some questions about meals. If I had the rest of the documentation, I could tell you what those were. Presumably that either that there were too many per diems or not enough per diems based on the itinerary that was provided. The next section with mileage, starting with 9/18/2018, that date apparently was incorrect to match the mileage claim. And there was a dollar amount and miles calculated, but no maps to indicate where those numbers came from. And then likewise, it looks like there was an issue with the parking date.
Are you ready for page 303?
Yes. So for 303, where I've circled hotel, it says Uber from hotel to SFO airport. There's a policy about taking, or for us to pay for travel. Well, one, I guess we didn't get there. That happens later. So we need the name of the hotel, not just that it's hotel. And then I had asked for some receipts, and then also talked again about that internet exclusion.
I believe you said the comment, see notes on page 301 about the total reimbursement was somehow expressed in pages 302 and 303.
Yes, because if there isn't supporting documentation for some of these claims, that dollar amount will change.
Okay. So going to page 304 to 305, it looks like a similar document for John Garrett with us. Well, actually, what did you do with pages 301 to 303 after you wrote on them?
I provided them and the rest of the supplemental information back to Ms. Campbell for editing.
And it looks like to me that page 304 and 305 are a similar document for John Garrett with a later date.
Yes.
This is essentially an updated draft you received from Ms. Campbell.
Yes.
Could you please, is the handwriting on these pages yours?
Yes.
Could you please explain what you were trying to convey by your handwriting?
Sure. The titles of the conference, both in the initial sentence up top and the initial and paragraph 1 is still not correct. It's missing the word in the first one and is written as on in the second one. And then I crossed out some additional information that doesn't belong in that paragraph. That was that erroneous conference title that didn't belong there at all in the first place, and part of it was still remained. And then 305, I've circled under the taxi shuttle train section. I circled that she has, Ms. Campbell put Uber from Hilton Hotel and in parentheses, Trace Mexican Restaurant. And I said it's still incorrect. And then made a more explicit note about it. that we can't pay for an Uber from the restaurant to the airport, and that the restaurant is not at the hotel. The only way we can pay for a trip from a restaurant to the airport is if it happens to be cheaper than what it would have cost to go from the hotel to the airport. And there needs to be supporting documentation included, that comparison information needs to be included, so that way we know that it's less expensive and that we can pay for it.
And are any of the errors you pointed out on the second draft things that you had pointed out on the first draft?
All of them.
Okay. Could you look at pages 306 and 307?
Mm-hmm.
And this looks to me like a similar document for John Garrett with another date on it, or a subsequent date on it.
Yes.
Is the, putting aside the handwriting, is this a document Ms. Campbell would have created?
Yes.
And is it essentially a third draft of?
Yes.
And is the handwriting on the document yours?
Yes.
Could you please explain to us what your handwriting is trying to convey?
Sure. The title is still wrong on the first one. Still says, well, I think before it didn't have the word. And now it says on where it should say in. The word annual title in that second paragraph still exists and should be removed. Now also the lodging dates are incorrect, which it looks like in correcting the other errors, maybe I missed the first time around. On page 307, under taxi, shuttle, train, she's still indicating that the restaurant is at the hotel, and it is not at the hotel, and put in an explanation from an email, but what is needed is a comparison fare, and that still was not supplied.
Were some of these errors on the third drafts things that you had pointed out on the first draft?
Yes.
And are some of these errors things you had pointed out on the second draft?
Yes.
Were these types of errors typical for e-reimbursements you reviewed from Ms. Campbell?
Yes.
Based upon your experience, are these, is this level of errors typical for someone who holds a financial specialist role?
No, particularly not a financial specialist senior role.
Thank you. All right, I think we can go to page 321.
Okay.
Actually, actually 320, if we could go to 320. And I just
Yes.
need to, are 320 and 321 different versions of the same invoice, or are they for different, are they different invoices altogether?
No, they're it's the same invoice, just multiple corrections.
Okay. And okay, so Then let's start on page 320.
Okay.
Putting aside the handwriting, how did you receive this document?
I'm sorry, you cut out. What was the second part of that?
Putting aside the issue of the handwriting, is this a document you've seen before?
Yes.
And in what context did you see it?
I was reviewing it for accuracy.
And aside from the handwriting, who created this document?
FedEx.
And so there's a item that's circled.
Yes.
That circled information, who would have provided that information?
Ms. Campbell.
Okay, and is the handwriting yours?
Yes.
And what are you trying to convey with the handwriting?
That what she has, maybe I'll take a step back to explain what we're looking at. So this is a FedEx invoice, and it's the job of our financial specialist to go through those invoices, and the invoice in this case, $115.32, could be one shipping expense or more than one shipping expense. And it's their job to track down the detail, or hopefully they have the detail already, and to list the information here that Ms. Campbell had started to, or this was her attempt at it, which is basically to assign funding and an account code, which would demonstrate what it is, which is shipping. And then the dollar amount for each funding string if it's more than one shipping event on the invoice. And so what she has put here is that all $115.32 is to be charged to this account AAB 1792. And there were a couple errors with it, and so I just circled it and marked that it was incorrect.
And what did you do with this document after you wrote on it?
I returned it to her for editing.
And could we look at page 321?
Yes.
Is this an updated document of, updated draft of the same invoice?
Yes.
And looking at this, is the information, you're the center of the page, the top line, it says 1118, sort of the area of the document where there's handwriting.
Yes.
Is the typewritten information something Ms. Campbell would have prepared?
Yes.
And is the handwriting on the document yours?
Yes.
And what are you trying to convey with the handwriting?
That there are additional errors. Ms. Campbell did identify that there were two different funding types needed to process this invoice. However, the math does, well, one, if you just add the two, does not work out, but also, or it does not add up to be 115.32, but also in the what would have been the any additional documentation would have demonstrated that it was the 4605 that she did not reflect correctly on this information that she type wrote on the FedEx invoice. The second circle where I've circled the number 4, that's the program code that I had mentioned earlier, which helps in conjunction with the number prior to it, the 539300. That demonstrates the mission that this expense was serving. I'm asking her the question. I know the answer. Should this be a 2 or a 4? Nearly always, if not always, any expenses for account PRJ 67UU are clinical, so that number should have been a 2.
All right, and moving on to page 322.
Yes.
Is this another document reflecting document from FedEx reflecting an invoice, an updated draft of the same invoice?
Yes.
And sort of the typewritten stuff near the handwriting as the typewritten information Ms. Campbell would have entered.
Yes.
And is the handwriting yours?
Yes.
And what were you trying to express by the handwriting?
From the top, the 4645, I indicated that was still incorrect and did provide the right amount on the prior version. And then also I circled the number 4 again and indicated it should be a 2 and that it was still incorrect.
Thank you. Were these types of mistakes typical for Ms. Campbell?
Yes.
And were they typical for e-reimbursements completed by other individuals who had the title of financial specialist senior?
No.
Okay, if we could turn to page, I think this is the last one. Oh. Yep, that's the last one that we're going to go through in detail. Could if I use the phrase internal customers, is that a concept you recognize, Ms. Pinch?
I would consider an internal customer to be someone employed by the university that we were doing work for. Is that what you mean by it?
Yes, I just.
Okay.
Did you ever communicate directly with any of Ms. Campbell's internal customers?
Yes.
Did you ever communicate directly with internal customers of other people who reported to you?
If needed, yes.
Okay. Could you please turn to Exhibit 23?
Yes.
And it starts on page 185 and goes through page 187. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's correspondence between Ms. Campbell and WI regarding some FedEx charges.
And is there a reason why? I'm looking at the top email on page 185, dated October 12th, 2018 at 3:34 p.m. Is there a reason why you sent this email directly to Dr. Kai?
Did you say, oh, yes.
I'm sorry, I need a question here. I'm looking at the top. It looks like it's sent to Miss Campbell.
Teresa, yeah.
Oh.
I think you mean the one below it.
Okay, you're right.
The one that was set at 3:16 p.m. Is that the one you mean?
Correct.
Okay.
Is there a reason why you sent this email directly to Dr. Kai?
Yes, because there had been several email exchanges. I believe from the top email that we haven't gotten to yet, there were 7. I remember there being several. Back and forth correspondence between Weibo Kai and Ms. Campbell regarding which of the invoices were his and which were not. And her feedback had indicated that she was processing an invoice or had processed an invoice and is still processing another invoice. And both of those in reference were ones he indicated were not his. And I was concerned, one, about the number of back and forth correspondence over what should be a relatively simple process, as well as the fact that Dr. Kai had indicated several times that they weren't his and that she was still attributing them to him.
And now we get to the email that I was initially confused about. So the top email, October 12, 2018, that looks like an email you sent to Ms. Campbell. Is that correct?
Yes.
What were you trying to convey in that email to Ms. Campbell?
That of the 5 invoices that were being discussed, that Dr. Kai indicated that he numbered them, or someone numbered them. Maybe it wasn't him. Regardless, invoices 1, 2, and 4 were his, and that 3 and 5 were not his. Yet she had sent a response that showed that she had processed invoice 3, which to me means that she had written his funding on it, so that the invoice would be charged to that funding, and that she was still processing invoice 5, which to me meant she had an intended purpose of doing that for number 5 as well. And I had concerns that about why she would be telling him that he was going to pay for invoices number 3 and 5 when he explicitly said they weren't his. And so I had asked her to please meet with me before she responds any further with him, because there were clearly some ongoing communication issues despite 7 email exchanges. Particularly because he had answered in the first email exchange. And then told her I was going to schedule a short meeting for us on Monday morning, and this was Friday afternoon.
And why were you concerned about the number of email exchanges?
Our faculty are very busy, and this is not their favorite part of their job. And so I I see that our job is to be as clear and succinct as possible and to minimize as much back and forth email correspondence and sort of inbox clutter that we can. I take the same approach with any correspondence I send to them, particularly if it's around policy changes and things. I want it to be succinct and yet thorough. But not all of these multiple back and forths. And if it is an issue that's so complicated that requires 7 back and forths, that perhaps it's time to pick up the phone and have a conversation, or if it requires more people, have a meeting. But it didn't seem that a FedEx invoice should require that level of involvement.
When she was under your supervision, was Ms. Campbell performing or assigned to perform all of the duties in her position description?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Um, when Ms. Campbell was reporting to you as her supervisor, had you assigned her all of the duties she was that are represented in her position description?
No.
Are you able to explain what duties you did assign her versus didn't?
From memory, perhaps. I know it wasn't all of them. It was a lot of that job is e-reimbursements. So we always start with that. It's also one that's, even though it's complex, it's well documented. So it's from that perspective, a somewhat easier one to train folks on because there's a lot of reference material. She was doing, I think, some requisitions, working on, she did have a purchasing card. Those are the things I can think of off the top of my head.
Is there a reason why you didn't assign her these other responsibilities?
Her work product wasn't anywhere near where it needed to be for the duties that she was working on. And it's been my experience as a supervisor that adding more duties when the employee does not have a great understanding or a mastery, I guess, even, but a great understanding of this, that the solution is not to add more tasks to their plate.
And are there reasons why you were concerned, had particular concerns about certain of the duties you hadn't yet assigned to her?
Perhaps some of them, like, for example, the non-salary cost transfers that Ranji B assigned her. That process is one of identifying errors that were made in the general ledger and moving those expenses to a correct place in the general ledger. And so those items are already ripe for audit. And with the number of errors that Ms. Campbell had on items where it's things like data entry or replicating things from one document to another, I was really concerned about her taking on things that were corrections to problems when her own material was not able to come out right the first time almost ever.
Thank you. Could we now go to Exhibit R12, which starts on page 147?
Sure.
And I think we've already authenticated this.
Yeah.
So I just want you to look at the final paragraph.
Yes.
It looks like Ms. Campbell is asking you to be introduced to the other aspects of her responsibilities. And what was your response to that request?
So, Even to date, there are very few people involved in the expense reconciliation between the UW Medical Foundation and the university. And that's because it's complicated. It's a movement of funds between or from the UW Medical Foundation, which is our practice plan, to the university based on actual expenses from the prior month. And it requires identification of those expenses, what they are, if it was appropriate that they were on that funding to begin with, if they were coded appropriately in all ways, and details about what those purchases were. And then taking that list of expenses and translating it into a different chart of accounts that the UW Medical Foundation has. So that way, as a mechanism to move money from one place to the other. I have one financial specialist who works on a very small part of it, and he has been here decades. And the other part is handled by one of our high-level accountants who has also been here for decades, and both have questions every month that occurs. So it is not something that I would have an employee in training who is struggling work on. That said, I know that she was involved in some of the detail capture for those expenses when I just mentioned about identifying each expense and what it was and who it was for. She was involved to some extent of tracking that information down and providing it.
So you can put that away. During her case in chief, Ms. Campbell indicated that when she was asking you about her work product, you had, or her training needs, you said you just have to figure this out. Is that something you recall saying to Ms. Campbell?
No, that's something I wouldn't have said to anyone, let alone Miss Campbell.
And I want to turn to complainants exhibits and just ask you a few questions. First, C108.
Hold on, let me move binders.
And I'll see if I can figure out which tab it's in. So this is part of C2A.
I'm sorry.
So
C108. Yeah. Okay. I'm just getting it. I'm getting it up here. It's, I believe I have it on the screen here. C108.
Okay.
Is that correct, Attorney Jaris? When we're moving between exhibits, I just want to make sure I've got what you're looking at.
yeah, could I just see the number on the, I can't see the whole number on the bottom on the screen. Yeah.
108. Yes.
So if you could look at pages 108 through 113.
Yes. Yeah, I recall this expense.
So do you recognize these pages?
Yes.
What are they?
It's email correspondence between Ms. Campbell, Marie Rutan, Weibo Kai, and I about a very complicated trip that he took throughout Europe that he was requesting reimbursement on.
And were you, when did you, let me look, when you started appearing in these? Let's see. First time I see you copied is on page 110 in the middle of the page. At the November 7th email, December 2018 email at 11:29 p.m. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me.
Would you would have seen the prior emails in this chain?
Yes.
And then it looks like it's on page 109. There's an email from Ms. Rutan directly to Dr. Kai and Ms. Campbell, dated November 7, 2018. November 7, 2018 at 4:44 p.m.
Yes.
Do you disagree with, or do you think it was inappropriate for Ms. Rutan to email directly to Dr. Kai?
No.
And why is that?
Well, in general, it would be completely appropriate for someone in Ms. Rutan's role as financial manager to contact our faculty with any clarifying questions, particularly if the financial specialists were not able to gather those answers. And that was the case here. So yeah, I think it's completely appropriate.